Some names and specific dialogue in this account may be fictionalized for dramatic effect, but the overarching story is based on factual events that transpired during World War II. The year is 1944. The skies over Germany are a cauldron of steel and fire, a deadly arena where the fate of nations hangs in the balance. High above the shattered landscape, a new predator has emerged, a sleek, formidable fighter aircraft that promised to turn the tide, the P-51 Mustang. With its revolutionary laminar flow wing and powerful Merlin engine, the Mustang possessed an unprecedented range, finally allowing Allied bombers to penetrate deep into enemy territory with a protective escort. For the first time, American air crews could strike at the very heart of the Third Reich, targeting its industrial might and crippling its war machine. But this unprecedented range came at a heavy cost. For weeks, these extended escort missions had been whispered about as suicide runs among the bomber crews and fighter pilots alike. The sheer distance meant hours spent over hostile territory, far from friendly skies, pushing man and machine to their absolute limits. The genius of the Mustang lay in its ability to carry extra fuel, typically in large, jettisonable external tanks, allowing it to accompany the heavy bombers all the way to their targets and back. These auxiliary tanks, often made of paper or metal, were vital for the long journey. Without them, the Mustang was a short-legged brawler, unable to fulfill its destiny as the long-range guardian. It was a cruel paradox. The very fuel that allowed them to reach their targets and protect the bombers also burdened them. These drop tanks, while essential for the transit, transformed the nimble P-51 into a sluggish, less maneuverable beast once combat was joined. They created drag, reduced speed, and made the Mustang a far easier target for the aggressive and experienced Luftwaffe pilots who were defending their homeland with desperate ferocity. To engage in a dogfight with these tanks still attached was tantamount to signing your own death warrant. Every ounce of fuel was precious, every gallon a lifeline, yet it also presented a profound tactical dilemma. Pilots like Captain John "Lucky" Miller, flying out of a base in England, knew this dilemma intimately. He'd seen comrades fall, caught unawares by a sudden ambush, their Mustangs hampered by the very tanks that had gotten them there. The standard procedure was clear. Once enemy fighters were sighted, or before entering a known combat zone, the tanks were to be dropped. But the skies of Germany were unpredictable. Engagements could erupt from nowhere, a sudden flash of silver, the guttural roar of an FW-190 or Me-109, and suddenly you were fighting for your life with two cumbersome fuel tanks still clinging to your wings. The P-51 Mustang, a masterpiece of engineering, was designed for speed and agility. Its sleek lines and formidable firepower made it a terror in the hands of a skilled pilot. But even the best aircraft had its weaknesses, and for the long-range escort missions, those weaknesses were amplified by the necessity of external fuel. The pilots understood the risks. They understood the strategic importance of their missions. But these were not men to simply accept their fate, to resign themselves to the limitations imposed by their equipment or the brutal realities of air combat. They were innovators, problem solvers, and above all, survivors. The stories of their ingenuity and sheer audacity in the face of overwhelming odds would become legendary, transforming the very definition of a suicide mission into a testament to human courage and tactical brilliance. The skies were a canvas of deadly possibilities, and for the P-51 Mustang pilots, every mission was a dance with destiny. The limitations imposed by the external fuel tanks were stark, a constant weight literally and figuratively. To fly deep into Germany, they needed them. To fight effectively, they had to shed them. The dilemma was agonizing, often decided in split seconds where life and death hung by a thread. The standard operating procedure was clear: drop tanks at the first sign of enemy aircraft or before entering a known combat zone. But the Luftwaffe, with its formidable Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs, rarely played by the rules of engagement. Ambush was their game, sudden, brutal, and without warning. Imagine Captain John Lucky Miller, his eyes scanning the endless blue, the drone of his Merlin engine, a constant companion. He knew the drill, but he also knew the fear, the cold sweat that trickled down a pilot's spine when a flash of silver, a telltale contrail, appeared from the sun, and suddenly the tranquil sky erupted into a maelstrom of tracers and cannon fire. In those moments, with the cumbersome tank still clinging to his wings, the P-51 felt less like a swift predator and more like a tethered bird. Its agility, its speed, its very essence was compromised. This wasn't just a tactical disadvantage. It was a death sentence, but these were not ordinary men. They were the tip of the spear, forged in the crucible of air combat, and they refused to be constrained by a paradox. They observed, they adapted, and they innovated. The official doctrine might have dictated dropping tanks before combat, but necessity, as always, was the mother of invention. A new, audacious tactic began to emerge, whispered among squadron mates, then practiced with daring precision, dropping the external fuel tanks mid-dogfight. This was a radical departure, a gamble of the highest order. The P-51's drop tank release mechanism was designed for a relatively stable flight. Ejecting two heavy tanks, often asymmetrical in weight due to fuel consumption, while pulling Gs in a violent maneuver, was fraught with peril. There was the risk of the tanks tumbling back and striking the aircraft's tail or wings, potentially crippling the fighter. There was the momentary jolt, a sudden shift in weight and aerodynamics that could throw a pilot off balance at the most critical moment. And perhaps most significantly, there was the psychological barrier, deliberately jettisoning precious fuel, knowing that if the fight dragged on, or if the return journey was extended, those lost gallons could mean the difference between making it home or ditching in hostile territory. Yet the alternative was often certain death. A P-51 with full drop tanks simply could not outmaneuver an unburdened BF-109 or FW-190 in a turning fight. The drag was too great, the response too sluggish. Pilots like Miller began to understand that the immediate threat demanded an immediate, decisive response, regardless of the subsequent risks. The moment a German fighter latched onto their tail, the priority shifted from fuel conservation to raw survival. With a grim determination, they would press the release button, feeling the sudden lurch as the tanks fell away, instantly transforming their sluggish steed back into the sleek, agile warhorse it was designed to be. The difference was instantaneous, palpable. The Mustang, freed from its shackles, would leap forward, its controls suddenly responsive, its acceleration unleashed. This sudden transformation often caught the pursuing Luftwaffe pilots by surprise. One moment, they were chasing a relatively slow, predictable target. The next, it was a blur of silver, pulling away in a steep climb or a tight turn, guns blazing. This wasn't just a technical maneuver, it was a psychological weapon, a declaration that these American pilots would not be easy prey. They were willing to sacrifice range, to court disaster, for the chance to fight on their own terms, to turn the hunter into the hunted. The suicide mission began to take on a new meaning, not as a resignation to fate, but as a challenge to defy it. This audacious tactic, born of desperation and courage, would redefine air combat over Germany. Some names and specific dialogue in this account may be fictionalized for dramatic effect, but the overarching story is based on factual events that transpired during World War II. The pilot's cockpit, a cramped world of dials and levers, became the crucible where this new doctrine was forged. It wasn't an order from high command, not a memo circulated through squadrons. Instead, it was a hard-won lesson, shared in hushed tones during debriefings, affirmed by the grim nods of those who had survived similar encounters. A pilot would come back, shaken but alive, recounting the split-second decision to punch off his tanks. the sudden, exhilarating surge of freedom as his Mustang shed its dead weight. Others listened, absorbing the wisdom, mentally rehearsing the move. This wasn't just about survival. It was about fighting back, about refusing to be a sitting duck. The psychological toll, however, was immense. Each time a pilot jettisoned his tanks, he was making a pact with fate. He was committing to the fight, knowing that his fuel reserves were now critically diminished. The return journey, often hundreds of miles over enemy territory, became a tightrope walk. Every minute spent in combat, every gallon burned, chipped away at his chances of making it home. But the immediate threat of a cannon-firing Focke-Wulf on his tail outweighed the future uncertainty. The adrenaline of the dogfight often pushed these calculations aside, replaced by the primal urge to survive and conquer. Consider the experience of Lieutenant Robert Buzz Aldrin, a fictionalized name representing countless real heroes. Flying escort for a B-17 formation deep into the Reich, his squadron, the 357th Fighter Group, encountered a swarm of Bf-109s near Berlin. The sky erupted. Tracers crisscrossed the air, and the guttural roar of engines mingled with the staccato bark of machine guns. Aldrin, still burdened by his external tanks, found a sleek Messerschmitt closing in fast, its nose cannon spitting fire. He cursed, his heart pounding against his ribs. He was sluggish, unable to pull the G's necessary to shake the persistent German. In that instant, Aldrin made the decision. With a violent kick of the rudder and a hard pull on the stick, he threw his Mustang into a sharp turn, simultaneously slamming his thumb onto the emergency release button. A sudden jolt, a violent shudder ran through the airframe. The two 108-gallon paper tanks, half empty and asymmetrical in their weight, tore away from his wings, tumbling end over end into the chaos below. For a heart-stopping second, he feared they would clip his tail, sending him spiraling. But they cleared. The transformation was immediate and profound. The P-51, moments before a lumbering beast, became a viper. Its controls tightened, its response instantaneous. The drag vanished, replaced by a surge of acceleration that pressed Aldrin back into his seat. The pursuing Bf-109 pilot, expecting a predictable turn, was suddenly confronted with a fighter that seemed to defy gravity, snapping into a tighter arc, its Browning 50 caliber machine guns now tracking him. The tables had turned. Aldrin, no longer prey, became the hunter, his 6 guns stitching a deadly pattern across the Messerschmitt's fuselage. Smoke streamed, and the German fighter spiraled earthward, a plume of black against the grey European sky. This wasn't an isolated incident. Across the 8th Air Force, pilots were discovering the same life-saving truth. The P-51 Mustang, unburdened, was a superior fighter. This tactic, born of necessity, rapidly propagated through word of mouth, through the shared experiences of survival. It wasn't just about the physical act of dropping tanks. It was about a shift in mindset. It empowered the pilots, giving them a tangible way to seize control in the most desperate situations. They were no longer merely escorts. They were gladiators, ready to shed any impediment to victory, even if it meant gambling with their own return journey. The Luftwaffe pilots, initially confident in their ability to exploit the Mustang's temporary vulnerability, soon faced a new, terrifying reality. They might engage a formation of P-51s, seeing the telltale external tanks, and anticipate a relatively easy kill. But then, in the heat of combat, with a sudden lurch and flash, the tanks would be gone, and the American fighter would transform, becoming faster, more agile, and far deadlier. This element of surprise, the sudden metamorphosis of their opponent, frequently disrupted German attack plans and led to missed opportunities or, worse, their own demise. The impact of this audacious strategy resonated far beyond individual dogfights. It instilled a new level of confidence in the P-51 pilots, reinforcing their belief in their aircraft and their own abilities. They knew that even when caught at a disadvantage, they possessed a trump card, a way to level the playing field or even turn it in their favor. This psychological edge was invaluable. It allowed them to press deeper into Germany, to engage more aggressively, and ultimately, to fulfill their mission of protecting the bombers and dismantling the Third Reich's war machine from the skies. The suicide runs were no longer about resignation. They were about calculated risks, about pilots who refused to die without a fight, proving that courage and ingenuity could overcome even the most formidable odds. They were returning alive, not just by luck, but by a sheer, audacious will to survive and win. The audacious American tactic didn't just save lives, it fundamentally altered the aerial battlefield over Germany. For the German Luftwaffe, it was a bewildering and frustrating development. Their intelligence reports, their combat experience had taught them to identify the P-51 Mustang's Achilles heel, its external fuel tanks. They had honed their strategies to exploit this vulnerability, often waiting for the American fighters to be at their most cumbersome before launching a coordinated attack. They expected a lumbering opponent, slowed by drag, less capable of sharp, evasive maneuvers. But the skies were changing. Luftwaffe pilots, often hardened veterans flying the agile Bf-109s and heavily armed FW-190s, would engage what appeared to be a standard P-51 escort, only to witness a sudden, baffling transformation. One moment their target was struggling to keep pace, perhaps even presenting a tempting broadside. The next, with a flash and a lurch, the heavy tanks would be gone, and the Mustang would instantly shed its lethargy, snapping into a tight turn or a blistering climb, its 650 caliber machine guns suddenly aimed with deadly precision. This abrupt shift in dynamics often left German pilots disoriented, breaking their attack patterns and forcing them into defensive maneuvers, or worse, making them vulnerable to the now unburdened Mustang's counterattack. Hauptmann Klaus Richter, a fictionalized ace with over 50 victories, flying an FW-190, once described the experience in a captured debriefing report, referring to the American pilots as devils who shed their skin. He recounted an engagement over Magdeburg where he had a P-51 dead to rights, lining up for a killing shot, when the American pilot, in the middle of a violent roll, jettisoned his tanks. The Mustang seemed to leap forward, accelerating out of Richter's gun sight with impossible speed. Richter, momentarily stunned, lost his advantage, and the fight became a desperate chase, ultimately ending with the American escaping. Such encounters chipped away at the Luftwaffe's morale and confidence, forcing them to reconsider their long-established combat doctrines against Allied fighters. The strategic implications were profound. The P-51 Mustang, now able to fight at its peak performance even deep over German territory, became an even more formidable guardian for the bomber streams. Bomber crews, who had previously endured the harrowing experience of watching their escorts turn back or become entangled in sluggish dogfights, now saw their Mustang protectors engaging with an aggressive confidence that often scattered German interceptors before they could inflict significant damage on the big friends. This extended effective escort directly contributed to the success of the 8th Air Force's daylight bombing campaign, allowing them to systematically dismantle Germany's industrial heartland, oil refineries, and transportation networks. The very concept of suicide missions began to fade, replaced by a grim determination and a fierce belief in their ability to fight their way out of any situation. Pilots still faced immense danger, but the mid-air tank drop gave them an active, decisive countermeasure, a way to dictate the terms of engagement rather than simply react to them. It fostered a culture of aggressive self-reliance and tactical innovation within the fighter groups. Squadron leaders encouraged the practice, not through formal orders, but through the undeniable evidence of increased survival rates and successful engagements. This adaptation wasn't without its ongoing challenges and risks. The structural integrity of the P-51 was robust, but repeated violent jettisoning of tanks, particularly during high-G maneuvers, put stress on the wing pylons and release mechanisms. Ground crews meticulously inspected these points after every mission, identifying and reinforcing weak spots. Pilots also had to contend with the immediate aftermath of the drop, a sudden, often asymmetrical shift in weight and aerodynamic balance that required instant expert correction to maintain control. A slight miscalculation, a momentary lapse in concentration, could still be fatal. Moreover, the gamble of fuel consumption remained. While dropping tanks saved a pilot's life in the immediate dogfight, it dramatically shortened his range. The return journey became a race against the clock and the fuel gauge. Pilots often had to fly directly back to England, eschewing any further engagements or detours, sometimes even resorting to extreme fuel-saving measures like reducing propeller RPMs and flying at optimal altitudes for maximum endurance. Some still didn't make it, forced to ditch in the English Channel or bail out over occupied territory, but far fewer than if they had stayed to fight with their tanks on. The trade-off was stark: fight and have a chance to return or die burdened. For these pilots, the choice was clear. This audacious tactic wasn't just about a mechanical release, it was a testament to human adaptability under extreme pressure. It showcased the ingenuity of individual pilots who, faced with a seemingly insurmountable paradox, refused to be victims. They transformed a disadvantage into an opportunity, a moment of vulnerability into a moment of decisive action. The P-51 Mustang, already a legend, became even more formidable in the hands of pilots who mastered this dangerous art, turning the skies over Germany into a theater where audacity often tipped the scales of battle. The stories of these men, their split-second decisions, and their incredible courage became the bedrock of the Mustang's enduring legacy. Some names and specific dialogue in this account may be fictionalized for dramatic effect, but the overarching story is based on factual events that transpired during World War II. The decision to jettison tanks mid-dogfight was a moment of liberation, but it was also a pact with the devil. The immediate threat might have been averted, the German fighter dispatched or evaded, but the pilot now faced another, equally terrifying adversary: the vast, unforgiving expanse of enemy territory and a rapidly dwindling fuel supply. The journey home, often hundreds of miles, became a solitary ordeal, a test of nerve and navigation where every turn of the propeller consumed precious drops of high-octane aviation fuel. Pilots like Lieutenant Thomas "Tommy" Henderson, a fictionalized name representing the thousands who faced this lonely challenge, knew the anxiety intimately. Having just fought a desperate engagement over Leipzig, his P-51, Spirit of Sally, was now light and agile, but also critically low on fuel. He dropped his tanks to outmaneuver a pair of Me-109s, sending one down in flames and shaking the other off his tail in a dizzying series of rolls and dives. The exhilaration of victory was quickly replaced by a cold dread as he checked his fuel gauges. They were far lower than he liked, a stark red needle pointing towards an ominous future. The radio silence, once a comfort, now felt oppressive. Henderson was alone, far from his squadron, his big friends, the bombers he was meant to protect, already a distant memory. He had to conserve every drop. He reduced his engine RPMs to the absolute minimum, found the optimal altitude for fuel efficiency, and trimmed his aircraft for the longest possible glide. The roar of the Merlin engine, usually a powerful symphony, became a drone, a constant reminder of the fuel being consumed. Every cloud formation, every flicker of light on the horizon was scrutinized for signs of danger or, conversely, a potential landmark that could guide him home. The psychological burden was immense. The mind, still buzzing from the adrenaline of combat, now had to grapple with the terrifying possibility of bailing out over hostile territory or ditching in the frigid North Sea. Tales of captured pilots, of those who never returned, circulated constantly in the ready rooms. Henderson knew them all. He pictured the cold water, the long swim, the uncertainty. But he pushed those thoughts down, focusing instead on the compass, the altimeter, the endless horizon. He calculated and recalculated his remaining range, silently begging his Mustang to stretch just a few more miles. This desperate return journey became a common thread in the tapestry of P-51 pilot experiences. It fostered a unique brand of self-reliance. Pilots learned to navigate by dead reckoning, by the sun, by the stars, by any scrap of information they could glean from their maps. They developed an almost intuitive understanding of their aircraft's fuel consumption, pushing the limits of endurance. Many would land with barely a few gallons sloshing in their tanks, their ground crews shaking their heads in disbelief, grateful to see them back. The stories of these tight scrapes, the near-empty tanks, the emergency landings, the sheer luck, became part of the squadron lore. They reinforced the necessity of the mid-air tank drop, even with its inherent risks. The alternative was a guaranteed death in combat. The gamble of the return journey, while terrifying, offered a chance, a sliver of hope that these audacious pilots clung to with unwavering resolve. It solidified their reputation not just as skilled aviators, but as unflinching gamblers, willing to bet their lives on a split-second decision that transformed a lumbering escort into a deadly predator, even if it meant a white-knuckle flight home. The impact of this tactic extended beyond the individual pilot's survival. It began to subtly influence the overall strategy of the 8th Air Force. Commanders, initially wary of any deviation from standard operating procedures, couldn't ignore the mounting evidence. Pilots who dropped their tanks in a fight were coming home, and they were bringing down more German aircraft. The effectiveness of the long-range escort was not just in reaching the target, but in fighting effectively at the target. The P-51 Mustang, unburdened, could truly dominate the skies, clearing the path for the bombers to deliver their devastating payloads. This unofficial doctrine, born of necessity and courage, became a powerful symbol of the American fighter pilot spirit. Aggressive, adaptable, and utterly determined to win. It was a testament to the idea that even in the most rigid and dangerous of environments, human ingenuity could find a way to defy the odds, to turn the tables, and to transform a suicide mission into a story of survival and triumph. The ground crews, witnessing the return of these fuel-starved Mustangs, understood the silent battles fought and won, and their pride in their pilots and their machines grew exponentially. The Mustang, already revered, became almost mythical, not just for its engineering, but for the incredible feats performed by the men who flew it, especially those who learned the deadly dance of the mid-air tank drop. Some names and specific dialogue in this account may be fictionalized for dramatic effect, but the overarching story is based on factual events that transpired during World War II. The deadly dance of the mid-air tank drop became more than just an emergency maneuver. It evolved into a deliberate tactical element, a skill honed by the most audacious pilots. It was discussed in debriefings, practiced in simulated scenarios, and became an unspoken code among the P-51 jockeys. The ability to instantly transform their aircraft from long-range escort to agile dogfighter gave them an unparalleled edge, changing the very calculus of air-to-air combat over Germany. This wasn't just about survival. It was about asserting dominance, about turning the tables on a formidable enemy. The Luftwaffe, initially bewildered, began to adapt, but always a step behind. Their pilots, once confident in their ability to engage a burdened Mustang, found themselves facing an opponent that could suddenly shed its perceived vulnerability. This psychological blow was significant. Imagine the frustration of a seasoned German ace having patiently stalked a P-51, only to see it shed its tanks and, in a flash, accelerate away or snap into an impossibly tight turn, reversing the roles of hunter and hunted. The element of surprise, once a German advantage, was now frequently turned against them. This new reality forced German fighter groups to re-evaluate their attack profiles. They could no longer rely on the assumption that a Mustang with external tanks was a slow, easy target. The risk of engaging a P-51 that could instantly become a Viper meant they had to be more cautious, more hesitant. This hesitation, even for a split second, was all the American pilots needed to gain an advantage. It disrupted coordinated attacks on bomber formations, allowing more big friends to reach their targets and return home. Consider the meticulous planning that went into these missions. Briefing rooms in England buzzed with maps, weather reports, and intelligence on German fighter concentrations. Pilots like Major Arthur Ace Thompson, a composite character representing the tactical leaders of the era, would emphasize the importance of situational awareness. "Know when to drop, gentlemen," he'd often say, his voice firm, but more importantly, know why you're dropping. It's not just about getting rid of weight, it's about winning the fight that comes next. This wasn't a casual instruction. It was a doctrine forged in fire. The training, while limited in actual mid-air combat simulations with live drops, focused heavily on the mechanics of the release, the immediate control inputs required, and the mental preparation for the sudden shift in aerodynamics. Pilots would practice emergency maneuvers, visualizing the moment the tanks would fall away, anticipating the jolt, and instantly transitioning into an aggressive combat posture. It was about muscle memory, about instinct, about making a life-or-death decision in less than a second. The legend of these pilots grew, not just within their own squadrons, but throughout the 8th Air Force. They were the ones who flew the deepest, fought the hardest, and returned with tales of impossible escapes and audacious victories. They were the men who stared down suicide missions and found a way to not just survive, but to triumph. Their ingenuity transformed the P-51 Mustang from a mere escort fighter into the ultimate aerial predator, capable of both long-range protection and unparalleled dogfighting prowess. This transformation was critical to achieving Allied air superiority. By late 1944, the skies over Germany were increasingly dominated by American and British fighters. The ability of the P-51s to penetrate deep, engage effectively, and protect the bombers meant that the strategic bombing campaign could continue relentlessly, crippling Germany's ability to wage war. The audacious tank drop tactic played a significant, if often unheralded, role in breaking the back of the Luftwaffe. It was a testament to the human spirit's refusal to accept limitations, to innovate under pressure, and to turn the tide of battle through sheer will and tactical brilliance. The stories of these pilots, their courage etched into the annals of history, became a beacon of hope for bomber crews and a symbol of relentless determination against tyranny. Some names and specific dialogue in this account may be fictionalized for dramatic effect, but the overarching story is based on factual events that transpired during World War II. The transformation wasn't just tactical, it was deeply psychological, impacting every airman involved, from the fighter pilots themselves to the bomber crews they protected. Before the P-51's extended range and the tank-dropping tactic, the sight of escort fighters turning back well before the target was a chilling signal for bomber crews. It meant they were on their own, vulnerable to the relentless attacks of German interceptors. The long, lonely journey to the heart of Germany became a gauntlet of terror, punctuated by exploding flak and the sudden, brutal appearance of enemy fighters. The pilots of the big friends, the B-17s and B-24s, often felt like lambs led to slaughter. But with the arrival of the Mustangs, and particularly with the widespread adoption of the mid-air tank drop, a palpable shift occurred. The bomber crews, peering through their plexiglass canopies, began to witness a new kind of air battle. They saw their sleek silver guardians not just accompanying them, but actively engaging and defeating the Luftwaffe deep over enemy territory. The sudden jettisoning of tanks, a flash of metal falling away, followed by a Mustang twisting into a ferocious dogfight, became a symbol of hope and defiance. It meant their escorts weren't just there. They were fighting, and fighting effectively, ensuring that the bombers could press on to their targets. Lieutenant Colonel James Tex Riley, a fictionalized bomber pilot flying a B-17, often recounted the profound effect of seeing a Mustang shed its tanks. "It was like watching a tiger shed its skin," he'd say, his voice still tinged with awe years later. One moment they were flying steady, protecting us. The next, those tanks were gone, and they were a blur, right into the teeth of the German attack. It gave us courage, knowing they weren't just there for the ride. They were there to fight, all the way in, all the way home. This newfound confidence spread through the bomber formations, bolstering morale and steeling resolve. The suicide mission tag, once whispered with dread, began to lose its sting, replaced by a sense of shared purpose and a belief in their fighter cover. For the Mustang pilots, the experience was a maelstrom of adrenaline, skill, and sheer will. Imagine the cockpit of a P-51, vibrating with the roar of the Merlin engine, the sky a dizzying canvas of tracers and exploding shells. A German fighter, perhaps an FW-190, is closing fast, its guns spitting fire. The pilot, let's call him Captain Robert Buzz Alden, a composite character, knows he's burdened. His Mustang feels sluggish, a fraction of its true potential. He sees the enemy closing, feels the thud of hits on his wing. In that split second, instinct and training take over. His hand snaps to the release lever, a quick, decisive pull. The immediate sensation is violent, a sudden lurch, a sharp buffet as the tanks tear free, tumbling away into the void. The Mustang shudders, then, almost miraculously, feels lighter, more responsive. The drag vanishes, the speed surges. Alden's hands and feet work in concert, correcting the momentary imbalance, pushing the stick, applying rudder. The sluggishness is gone. He's no longer just an escort, he's a purebred fighter, a hunter. The FW-190, caught off guard by the sudden transformation, overshoots. This is Alden's chance. He slams the throttle forward, pulls into a tight climbing turn, his 6.50 caliber machine guns, ready to spit death. The hunter has become the hunted. This transformation was not merely mechanical, it was an internal shift. The act of jettisoning the tanks was a declaration, a commitment to the fight, a statement that they would not be easy prey. It was a gamble, yes, an acceptance of the terrifying return journey with dwindling fuel, but it was a gamble for survival, for victory. The pilots developed an intimate, almost symbiotic relationship with their machines, understanding every nuance of their performance, pushing them to their absolute limits. They learned not just how to fly the Mustang, but how to unleash it, how to turn it into the ultimate weapon of air superiority. The stories of these engagements, of pilots escaping seemingly impossible odds, became legendary in the ready rooms. They were recounted with a mix of bravado and solemn respect, passed down from seasoned veterans to fresh-faced newcomers. These narratives weren't just war stories. They were vital lessons, blueprints for survival and victory. They fostered a deep sense of camaraderie and mutual respect among the pilots, a brotherhood forged in the fires of combat, where the shared understanding of that split-second decision to drop the tanks and fight bound them together. The P-51 Mustang, already an engineering marvel, became more than just an aircraft. It became a symbol of this audacious spirit. Its sleek lines, its powerful Merlin engine, and its incredible range were all amplified by the courage and ingenuity of the men who flew it. These pilots, armed with a simple but revolutionary tactic, fundamentally changed the nature of air combat over Germany, paving the way for Allied air dominance. They transformed what was considered a suicide mission into a testament to human resilience, proving that even against overwhelming odds, a fierce will to survive and a willingness to adapt could turn the tide of war. Some names and specific dialogue in this account may be fictionalized for dramatic effect, but the overarching story is based on factual events that transpired during World War II. Some names and specific dialogue in this account may be fictionalized for dramatic effect, but the overarching story is based on factual events that transpired during World War II. The actual mechanics of jettisoning the external fuel tanks, while appearing straightforward, demanded a precise understanding of the P-51's aerodynamics and an unflinching nerve. It wasn't simply yanking a lever. It was a violent, instantaneous alteration of the aircraft's flight characteristics. The tanks, often weighing hundreds of pounds when full, were attached by explosive bolts or mechanical latches. When released, the sudden loss of weight and the abrupt change in drag distribution could cause the Mustang to lurch, pitch, or yaw violently. A pilot had mere milliseconds to compensate, to fight the sudden buffet, and to re-establish control before transitioning into a high G turn or a steep dive. Any hesitation, any miscalculation could lead to a stall, a spin, or a collision with the very tanks they had just discarded, which would tumble unpredictably in their wake. This required not just quick reflexes, but an intuitive feel for the aircraft, a deep-seated trust in its design, and an even deeper trust in their own training. Pilots drilled these emergency procedures, though never with live drops in combat conditions, until the motions became second nature. The objective was to make the transition from burdened escort to agile fighter seamless, almost instantaneous, allowing no tactical advantage to be lost to the German interceptor. The difference between a successful drop and a catastrophic failure often boiled down to a single expert input on the stick and rudder, a precise counter-maneuver to the aircraft's sudden protest. Consider the experience of First Lieutenant David "Digger" Davies, a fictionalized pilot known for his calm demeanor under pressure. On a mission deep into Germany, escorting B-17s towards a ball-bearing factory, his squadron was jumped by a swarm of Focke-Wulf 190s. Tracers streaked past his canopy, the jarring sound of cannon fire echoing around him. A German fighter, painted in menacing grey, was locking onto a bomber just ahead. Davies knew he had to act. His P-51, laden with external tanks, felt sluggish, a brick compared to the FW-190's agility. Without a second thought, his hand moved to the release, a firm, deliberate pull. The world outside his cockpit blurred. The Mustang bucked, a violent shudder running through the airframe as the tanks detached, cartwheeling below him. For a heart-stopping moment, the aircraft felt on the verge of losing control. But Davies, anticipating the shift, already had his stick hard over, his feet dancing on the rudder pedals. The sudden surge of speed, the newfound responsiveness, was exhilarating. He was no longer defensive, he was on the attack. The FW-190, still focused on the bomber, never saw him coming. Davies banked hard, the Merlin engine screaming its defiance, and unleashed a devastating burst from his .650 calibers. The Focke-Wulf exploded in a fireball, a grim testament to the Mustang's unleashed power and the pilot's decisive action. But the triumph was fleeting. The adrenaline high quickly faded, replaced by the familiar chill of dread. Davies checked his fuel gauges. The needles were already dipping perilously low. He was hundreds of miles from friendly territory, alone, and now critically short on fuel. The journey home, often more perilous than the dogfight itself, began. He throttled back, adjusted his mixture, and began the long, solitary vigil, his eyes scanning the horizon for both danger and salvation. Every mile was a victory, every minute a testament to his sheer will. These stories, repeated in hushed tones in the mess halls and celebrated in the debriefing rooms, solidified the reputation of the P-51 pilots. They were not just escorts. They were hunters, willing to gamble everything on a split-second decision. This audacious tactic didn't just save their lives, it profoundly influenced the strategic landscape of the air war. The ability of the Mustangs to penetrate deep into German airspace, engage the Luftwaffe effectively, and return meant that the strategic bombing campaign could escalate in intensity and reach. German industrial targets, once considered untouchable due to lack of fighter cover, were now within reach, and the Luftwaffe's ability to defend them was being systematically eroded. The ground crews played an unsung but vital role in this saga. They meticulously maintained the complex release mechanisms for the drop tanks, ensuring that when a pilot needed to shed them, they would detach cleanly and reliably. They patched bullet holes, replaced worn parts, and refueled these magnificent machines, often working around the clock in challenging conditions. Their dedication ensured that every Mustang that took to the sky was as ready as human hands could make it, a silent promise to the pilots that their gamble had the best possible chance of success. Without their tireless efforts, the tales of these miraculous returns would have been far fewer. The psychological warfare waged by these pilots was as potent as their machine guns. The German pilots, once confident in their home turf advantage, found themselves constantly surprised by the Mustang's sudden transformation. This uncertainty sowed seeds of doubt, affecting their morale and their willingness to engage. The skies over Germany, once a hunting ground for the Luftwaffe, were becoming increasingly contested, turning into a deadly arena where the American pilots, through audacity and skill, were slowly but surely seizing control. The suicide missions had indeed been transformed. They were now missions of strategic dominance, paving the way for eventual Allied victory. Some names and specific dialogue in this account may be fictionalized for dramatic effect, but the overarching story is based on factual events that transpired during World War II. Some names and specific dialogue in this account may be fictionalized for dramatic effect, but the overarching story is based on factual events that transpired during World War II. The legacy of these P-51 Mustang pilots and their audacious tactic of dropping fuel tanks mid-air represents a pivotal moment in the history of aerial warfare. What began as a desperate measure to extend range, transforming missions once whispered as suicide runs into feasible operations, evolved into a deliberate and devastating tactical advantage against the formidable Luftwaffe. The ability to shed the burden of external fuel and instantly transition from long-range escort to agile dogfighter fundamentally altered the calculus of air-to-air combat, allowing American pilots to assert dominance deep within enemy territory. These were not men who simply accepted their fate. They were innovators, warriors, and strategists who, through their skill and daring, turned a cruel paradox into a profound strength. Their actions boosted the morale of bomber crews, ensuring the big friends had protection all the way to their targets and back, thereby accelerating the strategic bombing campaign that crippled Germany's war machine. The psychological impact on German pilots facing an opponent that could suddenly transform from burdened prey to lethal predator was immense, sowing doubt and hesitation. The stories of heroes, both real and fictionalized, embody the raw, visceral experience of war from the cockpit. They remind us of the split-second decisions, the unwavering nerve, and the profound bond between pilot and machine that defined this era. The P-51 Mustang became legendary, not just for its design, but for the audacious spirit of the men who flew it, pushing its capabilities to their absolute limits. Their triumph was not just in surviving suicide missions, but in turning the tide of the air war, paving the way for Allied air superiority and ultimately victory. This is more than just history. This is the raw, visceral experience of war from the cockpit, a testament to the indomitable spirit of those who fought in the skies over Germany. Prepare to discover how these pilots turned suicide missions into triumphs, returning alive to tell tales of courage that still resonate today. If the untold sagas of courage, the intricate strategies of war, and the groundbreaking innovations that shaped history captivate your imagination, then Legends of War is your definitive destination. We are dedicated to bringing you meticulously researched, emotionally resonant narratives that transcend mere facts, immersing you in the pivotal moments and the human experiences behind them. By subscribing, you're not just supporting a channel, you're joining a passionate community committed to preserving and understanding the profound lessons of military history. You'll unlock a continuous stream of deep dives into legendary battles, iconic aircraft, and the extraordinary individuals who defined their eras. Don't miss out on our next compelling exploration into the annals of war. Every story is a testament to the human spirit under extreme pressure. Hit that subscribe button, activate the notification bell, and become an integral part of the Legends of War family, ensuring these vital stories continue to be told with the reverence and detail they deserve.